with no further ado, because I know he's waiting backstage and he's a ways away. Coach, it's been a while, man. How you doing?
Well, I'm doing good. A few gray hairs later since our old Peninsula Bellevue days, but I'm good.
Yeah, that's right, man. So Coach Amaral, we coached against each other. God, it was 20 years ago, like 2000, early or late 90s, early 2000s. And
97,
yeah,
98,
back
99.
in the NWAC days. And I'm pretty sure playing a game at Peninsula College was the only game I've ever been kicked out of in my coaching career.
Oh, that's classic. I think I paid to have that done. Yeah.
How? Tell me about China. You know, I spent a year with Bob Weiss over there in 2008, 2009, and I was in Shanxi, and it was one of the most unique experiences of my life. And I ended up writing a book about it. It was such a unique experience. We had an owner that would punch players at halftime, and had his girlfriend sitting on the bench with the team, and he wanted to call timeouts, and it was just a different world. I'm sure, over, the course of 10 years, things have changed maybe a little bit, but just talk about, are you loving it over there? I loved it.
Yeah. Well, let me give you a little. So I get before I even go into how I get the job, but I get the job. I'm coaching at Pepperdine at the time. We had just gotten let go. And but now I've committed to come over here, and I'm trying to get as many resources as I can and information about China. And Pepperdine has a campus in Shanghai, so I got in contact with the guy that runs the campus there. He's an American guy, and I'm just I'm asking him questions, and he said, "Listen, let me send you the packet that I send to our students. They're going to come over and they're going to come to China and spend the year in China. And I'll send that to you, and you can use for it whatever you want information out of it." Are you still there, Rick?
Oh yeah, I'm here.
You still there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, he in the packet he has a list of suggested readings. And one of the readings in there was a book called Brave Dragons by Jim Yardley. And so I get the book and I read it. I've read it twice. And as you know, right, the book was about Coach Weiss's, exactly, there it is. The coach is about Coach's journey in 2008 and how he got there. And then so I'm reading it, and I'm like, yeah, I remember Coach Weiss from Seattle. That's when I was at Peninsula. And then it goes into this, time about this Rick Turner guy. And I said, it's got to be, Seattle, that time, it's got to be the same guy. It's got to be the same Rick Turner. So anyway, so I've read the book twice. So now fast forward. Last July at the Summer League, and I'm in one of the small gyms there, and I look across, and Coach Weiss is over there sitting, and I waited, to appropriate time, and I went over and I introduced myself. He doesn't know me, and I introduced myself, and I tell him, I say, Coach, I said, listen, the book saved me. I'm reading the book, and some of the stories, like you say, that are going on, some are still going on 10 years later. And so I tell Coach, and we talk for a little bit, and he says the same thing. He goes, listen, I loved it there. He goes, we loved it, my wife and I. And by the end of the conversation, he gave me his phone number, and he says, Coach, listen, we would love to get back over there if we can sometimes. Please send me a message if anything ever comes open. It was awesome. But the book was great. Everybody I've told about China, and then I asked Coach about it. I said, hey, how, was it well done? Was it accurate? And those things. And he said there were so many stories that were left out of the book, but he thought it was well done.
Well, the guy that wrote that book, Jim Yardley, like you talked about, is living in Rome now. And he took a year off. He took a sabbatical from the New York Times. and he was a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer. This guy was talented, and he just traveled with us the entire year, and he just embedded himself into what we were doing. And it's interesting. I tried to get him on the live stream, and it's one of those things where you probably should ask forgiveness instead of permission, because if I would have known, I would have phrased it differently with him. But the New York Times has a policy that their writers can't participate in fundraisers. And I would have just, if I knew that, I would have just told him it was a live stream interview and come on with this, because that was just such a interesting, crazy group that we had. We had, I don't know if you ever heard of a guy named Dante Smith, but we had Dante Smith.
Sure.
Yeah, he came out of high school and entered the draft, and was drafted, I think, by the Atlanta Hawks, and kicked around a little bit. And we ended up with him over there in China, and he was great. I mean, he was not only a great guy, but he was a dominant player in the league, but he didn't have a name. You know, he didn't have this in which, you know, very well, they love over there. They want to get behind people they've heard of and people that have played in the NBA. And Dante didn't have a stellar, notable NBA career, but he was filling up the stat column every single night. You know, I sort of compared him. I always kind of compared him a little bit to Nate McMillan in the way that he filled up a stat box. Wasn't a point guard, but he can play the point. He rebounded it. He could drive it. He could shoot it. Anyway, so we had Dante Smith, and we were playing pretty well. And the owner got wind that Bonzi Wells was interested in playing in China, and he ended up signing Bonzi because Bonzi had played with Yao Ming, and you know, had the great name, and people in China knew him, and he thought they would create this excitement. And Bonzi's a great dude. He's a cool guy, but he just didn't buy into the whole deal. He wasn't the same teammate that Dante was, and you know, he kept to himself, and he wasn't interested in trying the food, and it just wasn't the fit wasn't right, and it kind of ruined our chemistry a little bit. And then Dante left to go to Australia and ended up taking the NBL team in Australia to the championship that year. What about guys that you guys had in China? Who have your imports been, and what have they been like?
Well, let me just really quick piggyback on the Dante Smith story, the small world of it. So how I got here to China was by a head coach by the name of Brian Gorgon. And Brian was, do you know who Brian is?
Yeah. I don't know Brian, but I know who he is. Yeah.
Well, so his story is this. Brian is an American. Make a long story short, American, played at Pepperdine in the 70s, kicked around in the U.S. for a little bit, then he moves to Australia, and he's been in Australia ever since, the last 40 years, to the point where he became the Olympic coach in 2004 and 2008 for Australia, and the 2008 Olympics, as you know, were in Beijing. So his run as the Olympic coach in Beijing came to as the Olympic coach for Australia came to an end. So he ends up being getting a job in China and had been here ever since. Well, he was the head coach of Melbourne United when he ended up getting this player to help him win the championship named Dante Smith. Yeah. Brian was the head coach of that Australian team.
Yeah.
That got Dante.
Player. I think he's still playing.
Yeah, I don't know. But I remember telling Brian about the book because I was just over the moon about it after reading it. You know, I mean, it was just because it was so insightful, and I learned a lot of history about the league, about Bailly, and blah, blah, blah. And then I get.
It's like we lost Coach Mark for a minute, and I'll hope that he can get back in here in a second. I know from being over there, the Wi-Fi is there. He is a little spotty from time to time. So he's back. And you were saying about Brian and telling him about the book and how much he liked it.
Yeah, well, Brian and Brian, of course, he jumps in on the Dante deal. When I got to that point of it, he said, yeah, he came to play for us, and he was the best thing that happened to our team, and we won the league. And so anyway, just kind of echoing everything to what you said. But so players that we've had. So when we got the job in that first year, we started with Big Al Jefferson. Big Al, 13-year NBA vet, one of the greatest guys ever. So we had Al was our big, and Darius Adams was our guard. And Darius was his third year with Xinjiang. They won the championship his first year, and then so we had him as year 3. And Big Al lasted 11 games. 11 games, and they switched him out and brought. Now we had. Let me start with this. We had Darius almost the whole year, and I'll get to that at the end. But so he was our guard. But the bigs we had we started with Al, and then we had daggone it, he's a stretch for, but he was here a month. I don't even remember. I'm spacing his name. Nick Minerath. He played G League, was about the extent. Never played in the NBA. Then we had Hamed Haddadi, who played in the league a little bit, 7'2" Iranian, who really is skilled. We had him for a couple months. And then we finished the year with Jarnell Stokes from Tennessee. And then we got to the finals that year 1. We got to the finals. So then and lost to Guangdong. The next year, last year, we started the season with Jarnell again and Eden Clark, who played with the Warriors and Kai Further. So,
Coach, how do you guys pick your export players or your import players? I guess is a better way of putting it. Do the coaching staff do that? Does the administrative staff do that? Break that down for me a little bit.
Well, our head coach is very involved. He'll get. Okay, so it starts this way. Basically, management will reach out to the agents, right? To the different agents, the Chinese agents, and say, we need a guard, we need a big, whatever, who's out there, who's available. Here's what we can pay, he's on the price range, whatever. And then these agents will, they'll send over the resumes of these players and film and so on and so forth. And then the head coach will watch, and because he knows what he kind of wants, and it kind of breaks down from there. So management has their relationships with certain agents that they trust, who they've worked with before, and they'll hit them up first and say, hey, give me the list of combos or guards, whatever, that are out there that we can get involved with. And it literally kind of starts that way.
So who are you over there with? Are you assisting with a Chinese coach, or are you assisting with a foreign coach? What's your bench look like?
Well, that's the deal, right? So Brian got me over here. I came over with Brian, and we were 15 games into the season. We were 10-5, and they decided to make a change. And so they brought in, you might remember him because, well, maybe, but the head coach at Bai was a guy named Adi John. He was the guy that wore the hat. He wore a hat, if you remember.
I know.
But he's renowned in China. He played at Bai. He was national team with Yao, head coach at Bai for 20 years, all those championships. He was the coach. And to top it, he is from Xinjiang. So he was available, right? He was out of coaching for the year. Brian's a foreigner. The foreign look really isn't great up here, whatever, so on and so forth. So they brought him to take over the team. A little bit like your deal, right? And what they did with Coach Wise to some degree, but and instead of like moving Brian on, they just moved him over 18 inches. So that's how the rest of the year ended. And then after the year, Brian was out of there and he went to another club, and then they kept me on. Yeah. So that's how it is.
Yeah. So what's Did you experience it the same way, or have you been experiencing it the same way that I did? It was, they kind of treated us like rock stars a little bit. You know, I never played in the NBA. I never coached in the NBA, but it was as close in my career as I've been. You know, as a foreigner, you can't drive. At least at that time, you couldn't drive. So we had drivers take us everywhere we needed to go. Drivers take us, pick us up. The crowds waiting outside the arenas were over the top, and you know, I loved the food, and our accommodations were great. Are you getting the same type of experience while you're there?
Absolutely, absolutely. And our club is, you know, I mean, our management expects to be in the finals or win it or be there every year. So, and the club, and you know, and they have, right? They won it in 16-17. We went to the finals in 18-19, and last year the semis, and we've got high profile name guys. So all those things you're saying is right. Plus Xinjiang and Urumqi is relatively small compared to the other cities in China that you're talking about. So we are, you know, it's a big thing if you're a part of Xinjiang Guanghui, you know, Flying Tigers. So yes, to answer your question, very similar.
Yeah. So you bring those foreign guys in. Do you find that they churn through because they can't adapt to the different culture sometimes, or is it more of they got to come in and produce right away in a big way and put up big numbers, and if they don't right away, then they're gone and we got to bring someone else in? Because that's the bottom line there. If you're going to come in as a foreign player, you have to produce, you have to put up numbers.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. And that's generally the case for most teams. And again, I'll just say our team is just a little bit different right now because our coach is he's a little bit different from the standpoint that, like, we don't just give the ball to the import guard and say, go ahead and pick and roll and go get 45. You know, he doesn't want to play that way. In fact, right now, we just started playing on October 17th. We don't have an import. And we finished the season last year. We finished the restart. We started in June. We played the rest of the schedule without an import. So we went all the way into the semis with just all Chinese.
Yeah.
So he's a little bit different from that standpoint. But in generalizing, yeah, these guys they're expected, especially the guards, right? Because they're in there most of the time. You know, it's a guard's game, and they got to produce. And the bigs, you know, got to get probably 20 and 10, right? Double, and the guards got to generally average 30. It's crazy, right? But that's now they've changed. You know, without really maybe your next question, but where things have changed a little bit in China. The rules are these now. I don't know what it was then, but here's the rules, and they've changed just even in the last year. The imports can play 6 quarters. That's what it was. They can play 2 quarters together, right? Only 2 imports on the court together at once for 2 quarters. And they can never play together in the 4th quarter. So typically what teams would do is they would play, you know, 1 import in the 1st quarter. They'd switch them out, right? Guard big, but only 1 on the court. 2nd quarter and 3rd quarter, both imports are in together. And in the 4th quarter, it was usually the guard, right? Sometimes the big a little bit, but usually the guard. And that's what was allowed. Well, after this past World Cup kind of debacle here in China, where they didn't make it out, they hosted it, they didn't make it out of the World Cup to go to the Olympics. They revamped and said, how do we make Chinese basketball better? What do we do? Blah, blah, blah. And so this season, right now, the imports, you can only ever have 1 import on the court. Ever. Yeah. So they can only play 4 quarters now. And if you play a team that doesn't have an import, like us right now, if you play us and you do have one, they can only play 2 quarters. So
That's
the
interesting.
number of the time that the imports are on the court now is way less.
It's probably a good idea, don't you think?
Well,
for Chinese
I do
basketball?
I do and I don't. Here's what I would have proposed. I still think you get better playing against better players, whether it's in a game or in the practices, right? So having the imports, whether you have 2 of them or 3 of them, whatever, allow them still to play in the first 3 quarters. But in the fourth quarter, no imports. Let the Chinese players decide the game, right? Because they complain that the guard just has the ball in his hand and he's just going pick and roll and blah, blah, blah. Well, in the fourth quarter, it's just Chinese players. Let them decide it, those 12 minutes. But obviously that's me thinking that. I think you could solve both cases a little bit more, but systematically it's way deeper than that in terms of evolving the basketball in China.
Yeah. I'm going to let you go here in just a couple of minutes. I got a couple more things I want to ask you about. One of which is obviously the whole pandemic thing and how it's affected everything around the world. How's it affecting you guys? Are you guys playing in a bubble? Are you guys playing in front of fans? What's your situation with that currently?
It's the weirdest thing. We started the restart back on June 17th to finish last season, in a bubble. It started in Guangdong and in Qingdao. That was phase 1. Then phase 2, they brought all the teams into Qingdao in 2 hotels, 2 arenas. And by the end, they were allowing fans, right? Every other seat, up in the upper levels, so on and so forth. That's how it ended. So now we just restarted again October 17th in Juji, which is a little city in Xinjiang province, in 2 venues, in 2 hotels, but no fans. And it's okay. So there's the first phase is 12 games, and it's going to be in this bubble. It's going to finish around November 14th, and then there's a FIBA window. Some FIBA games so the league stopped for about 12 days. And then all those guys that left are going to have to quarantine again when they come back. So they say the league's going to stop for about 28 days, maybe 30 days. After that, as of right now, it'll be a bubble again for another probably 12-game phase. And then the idea is then you'll be able to play home and home and it'll be back to normal.
Well,
but yeah, so anyway, that's what it is right now.
Well, I know this. If the COVID is not passed through cigarette smoke, then you guys will be safe because coming out of halftime of every game, it was absolutely blue fog over the court from cigarette smoke at halftime.
That was classic, and we were just talking about that the other day. They said because the Jay Humphreys, the name Jay Humphreys.
Yeah.
So Jay's an assistant with Stephon Marbury right now with Beicong in Beijing. And in 2001, Jay was a coach at Jilin up in Shenzhen. And so he said, and they still play in the same arena, that still Quonset hut looking type of arena there in Shenzhen up there in Jilin. Anyway, he said that the smoke was so bad, right, in the arenas, like what you used to experience, that whenever the game was televised, they didn't allow people to smoke because otherwise the cameras, right, you couldn't see the floor from the upper level of the arena because the smoke was so thick in the arena.
Like the Fog Bowl in Green Bay or Chicago or whatever that was many years ago. Jay Humphreys, I believe, he had a great career in China, didn't he, Jay Humphreys?
I don't know his career. I know he was there. Then he coached he coached Steph's first year in Guangzhou. I mean, in Guangzhou, when it was in Foshan, when the team was in Foshan, and that's how he got to know Steph.
What about Marbury? What an amazing resurrection Marbury did with his career. I mean, he's as big as it gets in China, isn't he?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, they got a statue. He won 3 championships in Beijing. And they put a stage. He's got a museum. He's got a museum. You should, if you haven't seen it, you should watch his Netflix. What's it called? The kid from Coney Island.
I saw
on Netflix. It's really good. I thought it was really well done. Really well done.
Yeah.
And he's here. We talked a little bit about it. I told him I thought it was great, and that the last scene was unbelievable. Right, it was a tearjerker. But
yeah, it really was.
But anyway, yeah, that was really good, and it sure has. I mean, now they're struggling right now as a team, but he does a good job with those guys.
Yeah. Tell me about the whole idea of saving face. Has that come into play with you at all? That was something that I could never, just culturally, I could not wrap my head around what that meant. I didn't know ever how to prevent someone from losing face. And I remember having a conversation in practice with our Chinese coach. And I asked him a question about how we were going to defend the ball screen with these 2 guys. And he pulled me aside after practice and told me that I shouldn't ask him a question in front of the other players because it made him lose face. And I never got it. And I don't know whether if in 2 years there, or as long as you've been there, has that been a problem, or have you got a concept of it?
I get the concept. I for sure have the concept. I haven't had that, like been told like your scenario, but I understand the whole saving face thing. It's huge. It's huge. It's huge, and it's real. And that term, the first time I ever heard it, I didn't get it. Well, going back to Brian Brian having been here 9 years. And then he hired a strength and conditioning guy from Australia who had been in China for a year already. So he had the experience. Man, the insight those guys provided just in terms of, things like that, saving face, or, coaching the Chinese guys being American with the rah-rah, just little tips and tricks of the trade were unbelievably helpful in terms of an understanding, of the culture and some of that. But yeah, the saving face thing for sure. I mean, I get that. Let me take
you back to NWAC days for a second, because a few weeks ago, and I talked about this at the top of the broadcast when we kicked this off at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, and I'm not sure what time it was in China, but I brought up our old pal Keith Kingsbury, who passed away a few weeks ago. And you don't have to be at the top of the sport to be an impactful coach. And there's so many, the list goes on forever of coaches who have had great impacts, but Coach Kingsbury in the Pacific Northwest and within the junior college ranks around here was a legend that a lot of people didn't know about.
Right. Yeah. And I only knew about him because my very first coaching job at Carroll College in Helena, Montana, we had a kid by the name of Thurman Holtzclaw. And Thurman played for Coach Kingsbury. And I remember the coach at the time, Gary Turcotte, had told me about this Keith Kingsbury guy. And that's the only reason I had known about him. And then that was 6 years later or so, 7 years later, I get the Peninsula job, and now I'm coaching against him. And, Coach was the way he was, and, grimy and everything. And I remember coming in and, I wanted to make sure our Peninsula, we had practice gear, and, you wear your practice gear and you're looking good for practice and everything else. And his teams are going daggone shirts and skins. You know what I mean? His college team at practice, and they were tough and they were organized, and he'd wear his sweatsuit, I've got my tie and the jacket, and I'm, make big time where you're at, whole deal, that Frosty Westerling deal. And he's in his, sweatsuit, Adidas sweatsuit, coaching them up, and his teams, man, they were hard to play. They were hard to beat. And I think he just had great perspective, probably. After when he passed, I saw, and I'm of course following on Twitter, the number of, like you say, the people he impacted, especially in the Pacific Northwest, and people really don't know who he is outside of that, unless came in and recruited his players. But yeah, he definitely had his, fingerprints on a lot of people's careers and programs. Sounds like,
Coach, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you jumping on all the way from China, and the website worked, the Wi-Fi held up, and I'm super psyched about it. And it's awesome to see you. It's really great to see you. It's been too long. I hope to run into you sometime in China, because I loved my experience over there, and maybe I'll come back another time, and who knows, maybe we'll run into each other at some sort of FIBA contest or something. If we get to do what we hope we can do, we're going to have a fun journey, and hope to see you along the way.
Well, I want to hear. For me, this going back to the Brave Dragons thing has made really full circle for me a little bit. It did with Coach Weiss, right? And then, but I knew you. I didn't know Coach Weiss, right? But I knew you coached against you, right? I mean, the whole deal. And then to hear, oh wow, China, and I'm like, and then here we are, face to face on the website. So that's pretty awesome. But can you take 2 minutes and explain to me a little bit what you're doing? I see Paris.
Hey, I got the next 6 hours in front of me, Coach. I've got all day. So to kind of fill you in on how I ended up in this chair. About 21 years ago, I started doing camps in Kingston, Jamaica. And in fact, another coach who is so impactful, Coach Ed Peppel, who passed away a few weeks ago as well, Hall of Fame high school coach from this area, actually started that camp down there. And that's sort of how I ended up involved with it. And over the course of so many years, getting to know the lay of the land and the people involved, and knowing what this program can be. I pounded on the door with a plan, telling them that I think I can help you guys get to where you want to go. Here's how I think we can do it. And, after pounding long enough, finally someone gave in, right? It's like you ask a girl out long enough and finally she says yes. And then you're like, oh, now what do we do? I end up getting the job, and I knew right away that we needed to play to shoot for something, and we needed to verbalize it. And so from day one, we started talking about Paris 2024, and trying to make people believe that we can get there. And I truly, I don't mean pull the wool over their eyes. I mean, seriously, I do think we can get there. And when I identify the people that are in the pipeline and the players that are out there playing, whether it be in Europe or South America or over in Asia, there's a good nucleus of guys to work with. Now, the problem they've had is that the only kids currently that are able to get off the island are bigs. So you talk about a guy we had on a couple hours ago, Amaral Gill, 7'3" from Seton Hall, was a Big East Defensive Player of the Year and Most Improved, and Nick Richards, who just left Kentucky, 6'10", all SEC performer with Coach Cal, and we had Coach Cal on a little earlier today as well, and then Kofi Coburn, who's at Illinois, was the Big Ten Freshman of the Year. These are all young guys. I understand that winning on the international stage at that level, it's done with veterans. But my point is that there's guys in the pipeline, along with kids at Utah and Manhattan University and Rider, and there's guys coming through, and if we can find the right mix of guys, if we can find some point guards that are able to run a team and control a team, I think that we have a group that can do it. So that's kind of what led to this, and as you can probably imagine, when trying to put something like this together, when you feel like you have so many of the pieces. You have the talent end of it put together. You have the want to and the passion and the people behind you that want to do it. And the only thing you're lacking is funding. Well,
sure.
I figured we gotta figure out a way to do this. And so if I have to knock on every single door of everyone I know and then some, and ask them to knock on some doors and do it one step at a time, as long as we get it done, we'll get it done. And I'm not trying to sound cliche-ish there, but that's kind of the way I feel about it. So I put this thing together, 24-hour live stream, to just kind of announce our presence to the world, say this is who we are, this is what we want to do. We can't do it without your help, and so here's ways you can step up and help, and so so we'll this things like this live on forever on the internet, and we'll get it into other people's hands and spread the word, and hopefully at some point we've reached our financial goal, which will allow us to then really build the program in the way I think it should be done. And immediately one of those priorities is building a youth program. So who knows? Maybe you'll be seeing some Jamaicans playing over your way, not too far from now. And if you ever get back to the States, we need to get you down there and get you recruiting some of our kids.
Yeah, shoot, I'd love to get involved. That's great. What, I don't know if you remember, I had Ray Munyagi and some of those African kids, and that last year in 2000, I actually ended up going to Kenya. I went to Nairobi. I did. I went to Nairobi, and kind of a small world, quick story on it. There's a guy by the name of Brandon Goebel, and he started a site called JUCO Advocate, is what it's called on the web. And he was a student at Colorado State at the time, and there was a guy trying to, a guy was a military and anyway, he ended up helping this kid get to a JUCO and kind of being a quote unquote advocate for him. And so he ended up starting this website. He'd gather kids' clips and YouTube clips, and he'd put it together and he'd send them out to schools. Now he's got this unbelievable following. Well, he turned it into an international thing where he's gone to different countries to help kids, get over to the States and play. And I connected him with Ray because Ray's in the basketball world over in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Cool. Yeah. And so he went over there, and that was 20 some years later after Ray played for me. So it's kind of that's what's fun about the basketball world, of course, right?
Yeah, no, it's great. So you spent a lot of years in college basketball at the Division I level, and I get kids all the time asking me, what do I need to do to play college basketball in the States? And I'm talking about Jamaican kids now. What, to take a foreign kid, what's your advice as a former college coach? He's coached at all levels of the game, for a kid who doesn't have necessarily a lot of tape to show. There's not AAU leagues down there. That's something we're going to try to change. I know it's a heavy lift, and I don't know that I have any answers for it. But what are some of your thoughts about that?
Just as you asked me that question, I'm thinking specifically if it's a kid from Jamaica and he's right, like you said, he doesn't have film, he doesn't have this, he doesn't have that, and his goal is to. I'd really want to help him truly identify exactly what his goals are, right? Don't be broad and just say, I want to go to America to play. Because it's okay, well, then you go play at Peninsula College. You know what I'm saying? Or whatever. Or if you want to get a scholarship, so those types of things, identifying that. But, as you were talking and I'm thinking about it, I'm almost thinking about it a little bit in a reverse way. So let's say that a kid gets done playing at whatever school USA and he wants to play professionally, right? They all say, "Oh, I'll just go overseas," which is, it's just not that easy, right? And so the number one goal has to be just to get overseas, right? If you can afford to go and somebody's going to pay your bills and maybe you make a couple bucks for meals or whatever, but you're there, now your job is to get the next job, right? Go there, perform, and get the next job. And then build your resume and show that you can, right? If you can play. So as you're saying that, I'm thinking a little bit, okay, these Jamaican kids, they don't have film. They don't have a lot of things for people to just look at and say, oh yeah, we got to have this guy. Then the goal should be just get to the States. And if that means get to a JUCO and go perform, then you'll get your next gig. Does that make sense? Maybe.
No, it makes sense. I think what a lot of the hang up with these kids is making that connection. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do is build a network of coaches that we can bring down there. The rules are tighter at the Division I level, Division II level, but at NAIA and junior colleges, they don't have the same budgets to work with. But if we can figure out ways to get coaches down there and let them see these guys in person, and then I think opportunities open up at that point. It's tough, when you turn on the TV set and you see Kentucky playing North Carolina, and you're like, oh, I can do that. I want to do that. I mean, we know that as coaches forever. You've got kids that don't really understand where their own talent level is, but just trying to hook up coaches, maybe at these lower levels that can bring a kid in and let him grow with that program.
And I would take it a step further, Rick, and I would say, if you bring coaches, then you just eliminate, let's say you bring 10 coaches. Well, then only 10 coaches are going to have access to that kid. Instead, bring a guy like Brandon Goebel in, or bring a scouting service guy in. Now he sees that kid and he puts him out in his service, regardless of the level. And that guy comes and gets footage of him, like Brandon, right? He'll get footage, he'll get it out. And he's got such a good reputation now that people are like saying, okay, well, tell me more about this kid. So I think that's what I would do, the coaches, so that they get, they have the ability to fly down and do it and actually have an advantage, so to speak, because they spend time with the kid. But if you want to get them the most exposure, then I get the scouting service guys down there.
Yeah, you got to connect me with your guy. You said Brandon, right?
Yeah, I will. He's great.
Yeah. One other thing.
He would love it. He would love it because, like I said, he's already he went to I think he went to Kenya, Tanzania. I think he's been to Senegal now. He's been to Nigeria. He's branching this thing to give just what you're talking about. Give some opportunities to some kids that are running around out there barefoot on the court. You know what I'm saying? And that these kids can really play.
Yeah.
So he's going out and putting these camps on, and camps and clinics, and giving the kids exposure, and then getting information about them, academics, blah, blah, blah. And then he's taking it back, and he's an advocate for them. That's what he's. Yeah. There's a kid at BYU right now. There's a player at BYU right now that's going to be I think a junior at BYU. That is part of his mission. He went over to I think he might be a Tanzanian kid. Don't correct me if I'm wrong. He might be Nigerian, but whatever. Came over. Went to, I think, New Mexico JC for 2 years, and BYU signed him. And now he's at BYU.
Oh, cool. Tell me, I've been talking with the guys at Basketball Travelers about setting up some summer trips for colleges. Tell me, were you involved in that at all when you were at Santa Barbara or Colorado State or Pepperdine, and tell me what appeals to coaches about that? Because I think we're going to get on that menu, if you will, of destinations for this upcoming summer. And I want to make sure in doing so that the teams and the coaches that come down get the experience out of it that that they're looking for, that they hope to get, that team building experience?
In all those three places that you talked about, I was part of the setting it up for the deal, and then I left the year. So I never got to experience, and they weren't these exotic trips, but I was a part of that. And at the time, you can spend you have 10 days of practice before you leave. So that was huge. So you can get your guys there and you're actually practicing. Now the NCAA's changed their rules with access to the players. So I'd say that's not as huge an advantage now, because you can practice with you guys in the summer now anyway. But so that was number one big, but like you say, it's the time with your team, getting them all there. You can now have incoming guys go on the trip where you could not do that before. So if you signed a JC guy, signed a high school freshman, they can go on the trip now. So that's a huge advantage. And it's once every 4 years. So if you can, if you did that once every 4 years, and every kid in your program, if they stayed, would get to experience that. But the other thing that it becomes big for, if you're a smaller school, is you can use it to take alumni and help fundraise. You can be a fundraiser. And, you get some alumni or boosters, people that are big supporters of the program, and they come along. So there's a lot of benefits. Plus, what the coaches, I think a lot of coaches will say is, the games really are sometimes you go to Costa Rica, you blow those teams out, and, the games are really kind of the final thing. It's all the other experiences that you get as part of the trip.
Yeah,
so
that's cool. So I think Justin Murray played for you, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Justin Murray. Yeah. So he ended up, I think, walking on at Washington State, and wasn't in the top of the rotation at Washington State. He ended up playing on a pro team for me after then, and was really, really good. And he was one of these guys that got better and better and better. I mean, I guess is natural, as you get into your adult years. But Justin Murray was awesome, and was a guy that was on an ABA team that I had. We played in the ABA championship in Little Rock, Arkansas. In an ABA game in front of 15,000 fans.
Wow.
And against a team that had Todd Day, Oliver Miller, Scotty Thurmond, Brian Jackson, who went to Oregon State.
Sure.
Yeah, and Murray was great. I had a great time with him, and I just wanted to bring that up with you because I remembered as we were talking here, and you brought up Ray, it made me think of Justin.
Yeah. That team, the 2000 team, went 28-6, and those kids were Ray, Justin, Steve Town, Barry Willis, Eric Smiley. These guys, we were deep. We had a kid from Sweden. But Justin, what was interesting with him, and I give him credit. I was honest, and he expressed his honest opinion back to me. It's that whole, you are who's recruiting you, so to speak, right? And he had a lot of Division II and people that really wanted him, and he was convinced he was a Division I player. And I said, Justin, I don't, mean this in any disrespect. Not saying you can't go make a roster, but you're probably your best success is going to be at these other levels. And it wasn't, we had a great relationship. He said, no, I'm going to take this opportunity. And he ended up playing a little bit his senior year. I think they weren't very good, but he got time, and he had great confidence. And he's a great kid, long arms and those things. And we've stayed friends. I mean, when I was recruiting, I went by Life Christian when he was there. I think it might have been my last year or second to last year at Pepperdine. So maybe like 2016, 17, somewhere in there. And we went and spent some time. He was helping coach there, and he's doing well in real estate now. He's married, kid, the whole deal. He's doing great. Great kid.
I'm gonna answer my own question here because I was going to ask you what you love about it. You're a grinder, man. You've been doing it a long time. I have as well. And as you were talking, it made me think. And I'm gonna ask you the question, but I'm gonna answer it first. Great interview skills here, but just the relationships that you build with players over the years. And what's funny about it is I know that so many times those relationships are antagonistic when you're together, and then once they leave, they're part of your family forever, and you stay in touch with them and you cheer for them, and you see their kids grow up on social media, on Facebook or whatever, and hear the great things, and you root for them all the time. And that's, I guess, what keeps me going with it. And I would imagine it's a lot of the same with you.
No question. And even, I mean, you can see with the gray hair, been in this thing a long time, just even the years we're talking about. But, when you're around young people, it keeps you young. It's some of those types of things. I get out and shoot with them still and active. But you're right. It's fun seeing, like, I got to UC. I left Peninsula in 2000 and then went to Santa Barbara. And so what, 20 years ago, right? Those kids are, even the Santa Barbara kids, 18, 19, 20, whatever, they're late 30s, 40, 41, 42, and they're well into their careers and families and those types.
I got Coach Amaral backstage, and I think his connection's good now. And Mark, I want to say goodbye and thank you so much for jumping on, and it's great to catch up with you, and it's great to see you, and it's great to see what you're doing over in China. And thanks for doing this. I wish you nothing but the best.
No, this is awesome, and same to you. This was a pleasant surprise, and I was glad the schedule worked out where I can jump on and hang out with you a little bit.
Yeah, me too, man. Take care, buddy. Okay.
I got